people are so terrified, scared of their own shadows.
We could rule them like gods. Angry gods.
Hello, fellow basement dwellers, and in today's video, I will be explaining the true nature of gods in 40k. Now, there's obviously a handful of characters, pantheons, and creatures that pop into mind when I say gods. But for today's video, we will be going over 5 characters/pantheons to see who are the true gods of 40k. Now, the first immediate thing when I say who are the true gods that might pop in your mind are obviously the god Emperor, the Chaos gods, the Old Ones, the Catan, and the Aeldari pantheon. And I'm just gonna include Gork and Mork, the gods of the orcs, into the Aeldari pantheon. And first, let's look at the foundation of the solar system, the Catan. Now, the Catan and gods of the warp are very different. The Catans are the only quote-unquote gods of the physical universe that 40k has that I'll be going over. And the thing about them is, if all mortal life dies, like if all mortal life in the 40k galaxy would die, everything in the warp would quiet. Like, there'd still be things in the warp, but they would quiet down. There wouldn't be... The Chaos Gods would starve and would die out, but people's souls would live on. But you get what I mean? Well, the gods themselves, or quote-unquote gods themselves in the warp would die out, or be starved and heavily weakened. If you stop all of the bloodshed, all of the war, all of the violence, all of the honor, all of the courage, all of the honesty in the galaxy, Khorne, the god of war, will die. But if you eliminate all technology in the galaxy, every single piece of technology in the galaxy, you wipe it out, and then you wipe out your own technology. Essentially, all of the life in the galaxy will turn to monkey. There are still going to be Catan. The Void Dragon, the strongest Catan, will still exist, because he embodies technology, but not in the same way Khorne represents those aspects we just talked about. If Khorne only exists because there is war, there has been war, and there always will be war. But the concept of technology will always exist, even if no technology exists. So, the Void Dragon will always exist. You get what I mean? If you snuff out all fire, heat, everything in the universe, the Katana fire will still exist. If you have no sentient life, if you have no life at all, if all life in the galaxy goes extinct, including artificial, anything that can think goes extinct, the deceiver, the concept of lying, will still exist. It's still possible to lie, even though nothing's lying. So the Catan will still exist. And there are Catan that pretty much act on everything in this universe. Like, heck, you even have a Catan of the Flail, and the Flail Catan was shadowed and killed. But his curse still exists, so he still exists. He's still pure energy. Because Catan, before the Necrons gave them bodies, were formless, gaseous clouds that were semi-sentient, that were feeding off of stars. But they were more along the lines of feeding off stars almost as pleasure and to gain more power, as opposed to live. Because as I said earlier, you can't, even if these Catan have no fuel, they will still exist. Like, for example, later on in the War in Heaven, Catan began, eating souls and everything. They ate the souls of Necrons and many other races. They are not beings of the warp. They don't need that. They just use it for the power boost. Same thing with eating the stars. They don't need to eat anything to survive. They already exist as beings of pure energy. They can only gain power. They can't lose power. And as I said earlier, you have the Flail Catan. You have a Catan for everything, or a Catan that at least embodies parts of that thing. And one thing that people don't know is there is still a fully intact Catan that is known as the Outsider, that exists outside the Milky Way galaxy, that's just in between galaxies, just doing nothing. And also, a little fun thing about Catan is when two shards unite, they do form a bigger shard of a Catan. Like, if you take two shards and you put them together, they will form a transcendent shard, which is much more powerful. if you take two shards and one of them is much stronger than the other one, like if you have a big Void Dragon shard and a small Deceiver shard, the Void Dragon shard would just eat the Deceiver shard. But if you have two shards that have similar power, like a Deceiver shard of similar power and a Void Dragon shard of similar power, the two will combine and form a completely new entity that's a mix of the two. So, in theory, it's possible to take all of the Catan and mix them together to form a true god of the Milky Way. Not of the Milky Way, of the galaxy. But I've made a pretty good case for the Catan, but let's move on to some other gods. The Old Ones. The Old Ones are not gods. Gonna start that off real simple. They are not gods. They are simply incredibly powerful beings. Similar to the god Emperor before he was entombed on the throne. I will make a case that the god Emperor of Mankind is currently a god, but when in 30k, in the 30th millennium, the Master of Mankind was no god. He was just a very powerful man, similar to the Old Ones. But the Old Ones are debatably powerful and much better at gene crafting. They did go around the cosmos seeding life and did create many war races such as the Aeldari and Quarks, but they were still defeated. They bled. They had struggle. Although these guys were unfathomably powerful enough to push back the Catan, at the end of the day, they are just a very powerful psychic race that is very advanced in their technology. It'd be like saying the Eldar at the height of their empire were gods. Now, don't get me wrong, the Old Ones were much more powerful than the Eldar, both psychically and technologically, but it's still the same concept. They were just better Eldar, but they were no gods. There was the conflict where the Old Ones defeated the Catan, but not gods can defeat actual gods. And even then, we got that story from the Deceiver, of all people. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think it's somewhat true. Maybe the Catan were, eating souls of creatures to get stronger, and the Old Ones kind of pushed them back, but it wouldn't have been a war back then, because the Catan, to be fully sentient and fully able to react with our galaxy and, be the gods that they are, they had to have metal bodies, because they were almost split between these gaseous... They were almost like a space hurricane. It'd be like if you gave a hurricane or a tornado a body, but without the body, it's just kind of a thing. And so the Old Ones were most likely just able to kind of push this thing back where it came from, defeat this thing. But when the Catan actually had bodies and could fully use their powers, that's when the Old Ones got clapped. So no, the Old Ones are not gods. They are simply incredibly powerful psychic individuals with unfathomable technology. Next up is the Aeldari Pantheon, and yes, they are gods, but not gods of the entire universe, and I will get into them later. But first, we will talk about the Chaos Gods. Now, the Chaos Gods are a very interesting concept. Now, if you exist as a Chaos God, you have always existed, and you have never existed. This kind of means that Khorne does have a birth date. Like Khorne, Slanesh, all these gods have a birthday, but they've always existed. For example, Slanesh came into being in year 30,000, but she has been kicking since negative 60 million. The Old Ones not only kept the Catan at bay until they gained bodies, they also kept Chaos at bay. But at the time, the Chaos Gods were an echo. They were heavily weakened, had no real worship. The Chaos Gods get empowered via worship. And here's the thing, right? For example, I said I'm going to touch on the Aeldari gods, and these are both somewhat gods of the warp. Well, the Aeldari gods are kind of like mostly gods of the warp, but here's the thing, right? Look at someone like Cain, and then Gork and Mork. These guys, especially Gork and Mork, are the only reasons Khorne isn't de facto the strongest character in 40k, and hasn't just outright won. If orcs didn't have Gork and Mork, Khorne would have won by now, and that's because the amount of warring the orcs do with each other and with the other races, but mostly with each other. Orcs outnumber humanity 1,000 to 1. This is in a setting where you have 1 million planets, and some of these planets have hive cities of 1 trillion people, with 10 hive cities on that planet. And so the fact that orcs outnumber humans 10-1 is insane, and the fact that all orcs are warring with each other constantly. And all of this chaos and war and all this bloodshed doesn't flow to Khorne. It flows to the gods of the orcs. Now, if Gork and Mork didn't exist, and if all of that psychic power were to be fueling Khorne, again, Khorne would just defeat the other gods and would win. Because the thing is all psychic energy has to go somewhere. And me and you, in 40k, of course, are psychic beings, although to a lesser extent. Yeah, you have human cycles who, can, throw lightning at people. You have Eldar who can, throw lightning at people, and So here's the thing, right? A human soul is like a torch. The soul of a psycho is like a koi file, and the soul of an Eldar is like a house file. And so the Eldar, all of their psychic stuff has to go somewhere, or it will fuel something else. Like, for example, if you do not know the Chaos Gods exist, or even you hate them, if you do anything that aligns with them, like if you lie, you mildly empowered Tzeentch. If you fight, you mildly empowered Khorne. If you get sick, you mildly empowered Noggle. If you do beep, you just empowered Slaanesh. So all of your actions will feed something. It's just the orcs have Gork and Mork that they're feeding. And if Gork and Mork didn't exist, then they would be feeding Khorne. And that's where the Eldar come in. Because the Eldar created Slaanesh, who's a half Chaos God, half Eldar God. The thing is, right, is all of the Eldar wars were feeding Cain, the Eldar God of War. All of their creativity was feeding their creativity God. They had an Eldar pantheon feeding all of their psychic essence into these gods, empowering them, so that way the Chaos Gods couldn't feed off them. The old ones knew Chaos existed, and that's why they set up all of their different races, especially their very popular war races, like the Orcs had Gork and Mork, and the Eldar had an entire pantheon. And if they didn't have Eldar Gods of Magic, Eldar God of War, then all of this psychic energy would be going to feed Khorne, Tzeentch. But the old ones never predicted the Eldar becoming such depraved degenerates. And so there was no god of degeneracy to feed this. And that's why we have a fourth god of chaos, Slaanesh. Because the Eldar were degenerates and the old ones didn't foresee it. Now, do keep in mind, you have real wealthy individuals in all world that after just a few decades of having everything they want, they become sick, depraved degenerates. So, given the fact that the Eldar reigned for 60 million years with literally having limitless technology and limitless experiences, I can kind of see where the old ones wouldn't expect this, because the Eldar aren't naturally a very pleasure-seeking race. It's just the fact that when you leave them alone for so long and they just keep getting reincarnated and their life becomes so boring and gray after so long, eventually they're going to become degenerate. And that's why we have Slaanesh. And so because humanity doesn't really have a god, this is why, when a human fights, it empowers Khorne. When a human lies, it empowers Tzeentch. Because the God Emperor isn't a full god yet. For example, the God Emperor is obviously very powerful, and he is a god, but he's not powerful enough. And he's such a weird concept for God, because his consciousness is almost like a Catan being split all over the place everywhere. He doesn't have like a centralized consciousness like a pre-Necron Catan does, but at the same time he's all warpy. He is kind of like a chaos god of humanity, a chaos god of law and order. And so when a human prays constantly, that empowers him. But when a human lies, when a human cheats, when a human becomes a degenerate, when a human gets sick, when a human is disgusting, that still empowers the other four Chaos Gods. And this also allows the other four Chaos Gods to not only feed off of humanity like the parasites they are, but also allows them to infect and corrupt humanity so much. Pretty much the Orc's psychic essence, anytime it leaves around anyone, anytime it spurts out of them, okay, that sounded awful, but you get what I mean. Anytime it leaves them, it gets sucked up by Gork and Mork. Okay, this really doesn't sound good. It gets sucked up by Gork and Mork, meaning that their psychic essence isn't, although it's in the warp, it's protected from chaos. That's why orcs are so resistant to chaos. Eldar, all of their psychic essence is constantly being drained by Slanesh, because all their gods are either dead, weakened, shadowed, or only has a handful of members like Kegorak, or is in a somewhat dreamlike state like their god of death, meaning all of their psychic essence is going to feed Slanesh. And on paper, it'd be much smarter for Slanesh to simply allow the Eldar to keep procreating so she can, eat their souls when they're dead. But obviously, chaos is chaos, and so she will constantly be trying to eat their souls while they're still alive. That's why the Eldar are dying waste. Not because they can't reproduce. If the Eldar could reproduce as much as they wanted and could expand, they would win 40k. But because they're constantly having those souls drained by Slanesh, they can't. All the things that were sucking up all their psychic residue, all the Eldar Pantheon are gone, and everything that's left is the degeneracy. So now they don't have anything sucking it up, but now, if they wage war, it feeds Slanesh, not Khorne. It feeds Slanesh, not Noggle. It feeds Slanesh, not Tzeentch. All of their psychic residue that should be, being sucked off by the gods, is now being sucked off only by Slanesh. It's not even being sucked off by the other Chaos Gods, because she's a horrible abomination between everything in the warp, including human souls, all souls, and the Eldar. That's why she's a half Eldar warp god thing. So she's a god's generosity, but she's hooked up to the Eldar. So I'm pretty sure it's pretty concrete that the Eldar Pantheon of the Milky Way, they're not true gods. They are simply gods of the Eldar, weapons of the Eldar, more likely. They are simply weapons and protections left by the creators of the Eldar to watch over and make sure that the Eldar don't feed chaos, and the Eldar still screwed it up. And although they are gods because they are empowered by the warp, so they are a warp-based god, they're not like the other, chaos gods. They're weapons. They're not bioengineered. They're engineered, warp-crafted weapons made by the old ones to not only defeat the Catan, but also to make sure that the Eldar wouldn't be feeding the wall warp. So having your own patron god is kind of like having a condom, pretty much. You don't want to war dog the warp, essentially. And the Eldar are now war dogging the warp, and that's why they're going extinct. Well, before, I'm so sorry for that analogy, but before they had, protection. You always have to bring protection, And that's the reason why humans fall to chaos every 6 seconds, because they have no real protection. The Emperor gets empowered by worship, yeah, but unlike Slanesh that gets empowered by everything that the Eldar do, the Emperor only gets empowered by worship. So if a human becomes the general, if a human becomes angry, that doesn't feed the Emperor. Only pure worship does. And that's why the Emperor is still weaker than the other Chaos Gods. So I think it's safe to say that the Eldar Pantheon are not gods of the Milky Way. Again, they are simply weapons. And the God Emperor of mankind is, yes, a god, but only a half-baked god of humanity. And the Chaos Gods are nothing but psychic parasites. If the old ones still existed, because the old ones were seeding life in the galaxy. If the old ones still existed, I guarantee after a race would get big enough, they would give them a pantheon of gods to feed off of those psychic residue, so that way they have protection from the warp. So no, if the old ones still existed, the Chaos Gods would never have come to power or even exist. Because although the Chaos Gods did exist back then when the old ones were around, they only existed because they were going to exist in the future. But if you exist in the warp at one point in time, you exist in the warp throughout its period in time. But the more weaker warp beings are almost like a super echo, but the actual full-bore Chaos Gods have always existed and will always exist in the warp. But they also, if the old ones didn't exist, but if the old ones had stayed in power, they would never have existed, because the old ones would have ruled forever and would have given all those psychic races protection against the warp. So the warp is good, you just need psychic protection from a god. Well, a god to feed off of your psychic essence, so that way the parasites don't. You get what I mean? Well, the gods of chaos only exist because you have all this psychic energy that's not feeding into a god, so it has to feed into somewhere. But creatures like the Aeldari and orcs don't feed the Chaos Gods. Well, the Aeldari do feed one Chaos God because they had their pantheons feeding off their psychic residue, but the Aeldari don't feed the other 3 Chaos Gods. They don't feed Sinesh because she's the one feeding off their psychic residue. You get what I'm saying? So, who are the true gods of 40k? It's the Catan. It's the Catan by a mile. The God Emperor is half-baked. The Chaos Gods are parasites. The Old Ones are just a powerful race. The Aeldari gods are only gods of the Aeldari, and on top of that, are just weapons / protection against the warp. Meanwhile, the Catan, as I said earlier, embody everything. And not to mention, it's entirely possible that if all the Catans were to combine into one Super Catan, it's entirely possible that that would be the all-seeing, all-powerful god of reality that we see. Because there is no all-powerful god in 40k. All the gods have strengths and weaknesses. If all the Catan were to combine, they might just become the all-powerful god of 40k, period. You get what I'm saying? Okay, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you think the Chaos Gods are the true gods of the galaxy, you're wrong. But, yeah, please leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. And also, note, the Catan not only exists in all galaxies, they exist in all other galaxies. Meanwhile, the Chaos Gods only exist in all galaxy. So it's entirely possible there's other massive shards of the Void Dragon that exist outside the galaxy, though it's just big gods, essentially. Or it's possible that all the Catan are indeed shadowed from one Super Catan that created the galaxy. And there's other 40-powered Void Dragons in other galaxies that haven't been split in the shards yet. But they haven't been split in the shards because there's a Void Dragon per galaxy that were all split into pieces by one Giga Catan trillions or octillions of years ago. That is most likely wrong. Sorry for the tangent. I will see you in the next one, and make